While many of us are eager to see how Ricciardo will perform for Red Bull as a reserve driver, it seems like he will never get to be Verstappen's teammate yet again. What's worse for the Australian is that he's very likely to end his F1 career because he refused to drive for a team that isn't competitive enough to win races. The Australian has a very tough period ahead of him, and with all things considered, we are currently seeing the last of the Honey Badger. Ricciardo's 2 seasons with McLaren were probably one of the most disappointing in the history of F1. They left such a great impact on his self-confidence that even though he had a chance to be a starting driver in 2023, he refused it and decided to sign on for the reserve driver role at Red Bull. The initial plan was for him to replace Perez now that the Mexican has started to show teeth to Verstappen and to be the disobedient teammate who doesn't know that he is the clear number 2. But this plan is slowly starting to crumble, and Ricciardo is facing the harsh reality of his career, which goes like this. If he doesn't pick up a drive with a lower performing team, his career is gone. What Ricciardo doesn't want to understand is the fact that he is no longer the young version of himself, and even when he was, he had just 7 wins from 2014 to 2018, which wasn't that impressive for a driver to be considered a Hall of Famer. Ever since he left Red Bull, he managed to pick up 1 win with McLaren last year in Monza, and a couple of podiums for Renault as well. Now he believes that he can suddenly perform in a high-performing team that faces enormous challenges. This is something that was discussed by former F1 driver and Sky F1 pundit Karen Chandhok, who believes that even in the worst-case scenario for Perez, he doesn't see Ricciardo replacing him as the number 2 driver. I'm waiting to see how it plays out, because the last time Daniel drove a Red Bull was in 2018, and Formula 1 cars have changed a lot. It's like a different category now. I think Verstappen has changed a lot, given the trajectory he's been on. He's a 25-year-old whose confidence is growing. I think Daniel versus Checo is an interesting fight for the 24 seat. How do they evaluate Daniel? That's what I'm interested to see, because yeah, they can put him in the simulator, but it's not the same as driving the old car. So will they give him a go and test somewhere? That's what I'd like to see, is how do they genuinely evaluate Daniel Ricciardo today? It's not easy to be outperformed by a youngster for 2 straight seasons, but that's the reality of Ricciardo's time with the Woking-based squads. While many have been quick to blame it on the car, Ricciardo hasn't been quite able to deliver results, thanks to his driving style as well, and now at this age, he may not be the right choice for Red Bull after all. Remember, the same driver who outperformed him in McLaren will be eligible to sign a contract with another team after 2025. And just 1 year before that, Perez's contract with Red Bull expires. So if you were Red Bull and you had Norris and Ricciardo offered on a plate in 2025, who would you choose? This is something that even David Croft spoke about, as he took things further and said that Ricciardo is definitely not the future for Red Bull and that his career is facing a sunset. I think that they, Ricciardo and Perez, are 2 very different styles of drivers. They're both capable of winning races, but to me, they win races in very different ways. I hate to say this, I think Daniel's a terrific bloke, but he is not the future for Red Bull, not by any stretch of the imagination, mainly because of age. When Max spoke at the end of the season and talked about potentially stopping at the age of 31, that's a big revelation to me. He's already thinking about the time he stops racing. If he's thinking that, then Red Bull should be thinking it too. Personally, I'd be trying to identify someone else to come in the future. Well, this is definitely a field in which Red Bull hasn't struggled in their existence, given the fact that they have great scholars that are eager to prove what they're made of. Of course, they have to undergo the process of driving in AlphaTauri first. And even if they're successful there, like Gasly, it's not always a guarantee that they'll do the right thing in the senior team. But it's worth trying, and we've seen that Red Bull has produced drivers like Vettel and Verstappen thanks to their young categories in racing. Apart from Croft and Karen, David Coulthard also believes that Ricciardo is not the right fit for Red Bull, mostly because he doesn't look like his old self. And also he has a great legacy with Red Bull. His future is not with the Austrian team. What is the worst news for Ricciardo is the fact that he's had an open seat in Haas waiting for him, now that the team has proven competitive to score points, and he opted for the reserve role, hoping for the impossible to become possible. Coulthard even went to the extent of saying that his career depends on whether he can actually convince Red Bull that he's capable of driving for them. But in order for this to happen, Red Bull needs to make a clean sheet with Perez, which is very unlikely to happen now that the Mexican has understood that he could be in Ricciardo's situation very easily if he doesn't play by the rules. When talking about this matter, Coulthard said, "If he can get his mind back to what it was when he was having success, then Daniel has to have an opportunity to come back. If this opportunity doesn't manifest itself, then that's probably his Grand Prix career wrapped up." And it's very interesting that Perez doesn't feel threatened one single bit by Ricciardo signing with Red Bull, or at least he's playing it perfectly well. The Mexican has been on the receiving end of things from Red Bull since Brazil, the race where it all started to show up when it comes to the relationship between him and Verstappen. However, with the signing of Ricciardo as a reserve driver, Perez was reminded that guys like him are easily replaceable and that he's just a piece of the puzzle that's called Verstappen's success. It seems like he's understood this in a great manner because when he was asked about Ricciardo signing with Red Bull and whether he feels threatened by it, he said, "I'm very relaxed. We live under a lot of pressure all the time. It doesn't change anything from my side. I think it's a great achievement to have a driver like Daniel. He's going to contribute a lot to our team. He's a great guy. He's one of the guys I get on most with in the paddock. It's great to have Daniel in the team, and from my side, it doesn't change anything. It's all business, and from all the drivers on the grid, Perez should know that the best. He's been sacked from Aston Martin, a team that was known as Racing Point up until 2021, as the team wanted to go in another direction and signed Vettel as their leader. Well, the team went to the bottom, that's for sure, and Perez's career was salvaged by Red Bull. Now that he understands that in the last season, he is likely to play the role that he's been given by the team, because if it hadn't been for Red Bull, he would have likely retired. Yet being present isn't enough, and Perez needs to increase his level of competitiveness if he wants to be perceived as the reliable number 2 role on the team. That is why Perez needs a major rewrite in order to more closely match his teammate in 2023, according to Coulthard, because if he doesn't do this, then the replacement is patiently lurking in the dark, and it's named Daniel Ricciardo. When talking about this matter, Coulthard said, "For Checo to look at how many victories Max had and how many he had, it's not like he's just having to polish a few corners. This is a major rewrite, a software update. If you use the same ingredients in the cake, you will get the same cake. You need to change it if you want something different." All the knowledge is there for Checo to lift his performance. If he does, then the World Championship is there for him to put his hand on. If he doesn't, then he will be another driver, like myself, that won a few Grand Prix. With that being said, what do you think about Ricciardo replacing Perez? Do you see this happening in the near future? Let us know in the comments below.